Yeah, it's great to be here. I was delighted to be asked. Nice opportunity, to talk about what I call the invisible architecture. The things about buildings that we can't actually see, and yet that have a big impact on us. So some of that has already sort of come up. So the whole idea of Earth knowing, and the whole idea of knowing, I suppose, spans a lot of my career as an architect. So I knew when I qualified as an architect, I wasn't actually an architect. And I knew when I started working as an architect that I didn't like it. And I knew I didn't want a mortgage when it was suggested I should have one. And I knew I shouldn't get married when those seemed to be the options that were there for me. So I'm a 24-year-old architect in Dublin in the middle 70s. I had an aspiration to have a creative life, so I opted to drop out and take to the road. And none of the dire predictions that I was told actually came true. I had a wonderful time. And as part of that whole way of life, after about 12 or 13 years, found myself in an alternative community where people were fixing up houses or building houses or wanting to build houses, and I thought perhaps I should open a little practice. And my partner at the time said, "Don't waste your time. Those guys think they know it all." So I thought about that. Well, obviously they don't know it all because they're asking me questions because they've got problems. So I came up with this idea of teaching people how to design their own houses. After all, I was an architect and it shouldn't be a problem. So I didn't do all the preparation. Ended up sitting, thankfully, only in front of a few people, and I realized I absolutely had no idea what to tell them. That I myself didn't actually know how to design a house. So when I looked into that, I realized no one else did it either, other than perhaps indigenous people that were still working in their own traditions. So I started piecing together information to give to people because people were clearly turned on. The people who were building houses that were having problems obviously had the right idea. They needed the proper information, so I started feeding that sort of information to people, and then over time got involved with students, helping them get planning and then helping them build. And as people started living in these houses, the most amazing things were revealed in terms of the expansion of people's lives, I'll put it that way. And I realized that the most important part of design really was dealing with these invisible aspects of the architecture. Who was I? What did I want to do? That really buildings were contexts for things to happen. So, what would be an analogy? An analogy would be buying a beautiful clay pot for your kitchen and expecting it would somehow cook your dinner for you. No, you'd have to engage with the pot in order for it to produce your dinner. So putting a lot of information and a lot of research into what is it that people actually wanted before a design was created. And of course I always had an interest in low cost building because I never wanted a mortgage myself and never would have been able to get one. So I had developed a framing system then for low cost building. And when I went to Australia, it was in a magazine, and a guy called James Henderson saw it in the magazine, and as fate would have it, we met. And he said, "Oh, your framing is perfect for light earth." I said, "Light earth, what's that?" So he told me what light earth was. I came back to Ireland where I had a frame already, and the light earth was just perfect for that frame that I had made. So started putting the light earth in, and all the locals in Leitrim were saying, "Oh yeah, we always used to build with the old mud wall." But the earth knowing then revealed itself when I was getting volunteers to come. So somebody would come, you'd show them how to do the mixing. 5 minutes later, someone else comes. The person you've just taught is starting to teach the person who's just arrived. I said, how can that be that they can be so confident And it was that the earth awakened something in the people that they already knew. So this is the essence of the earth's knowing. That when we get involved with the earth, when we touch it and we feel it, it speaks to us in some way. And to my mind, this is so important now, that we need to look at things in new ways in order to come up with new solutions, particularly in terms of housing, but essentially in terms of how we ourselves live. So for this event, I've looked into this whole thing of earth knowing. And, what is it? How is it we know these things? Because that's what got me going in the first place with teaching people. People felt that they knew it. They knew how to shelter themselves. But the information hadn't kept up to date as it had been traditionally. You'd learn it in your community. And the whole idea of having knowledge of something, that used to imply, you had an affair with someone, I had knowledge of that woman. And having knowledge of clay is a little bit like that. It's like having a lover. How you touch it and how you feel it, and it suggests its intimacy. It also suggests that there's some secrecy there, or secrecy implies there's knowledge. And of course, secrecy is a big part of the architectural profession. But in my experience, the biggest secret of the architectural profession is that there's no secrets at all. So how do we access these secrets that the earth essentially speak to us? It's really by plunging in and getting involved. It's getting our hands dirty, engaging with the mystery and the secrecy of the earth. And when we do this at first hand, it acts really as a stimulus for our own awakening. It awakens us in some way, and it awakens our natural instincts, things that are inside us. It stimulates our senses, this touching, the feeling, the smelling, the tasting, the putting it on our skin. All of those things feel good when we work with the earth. And it really makes us aware that we're more than just flesh and bone. That there's stuff going on inside us, and that being engaged with the earth, being involved with the earth, awakens this and nudges us into this other level of awareness. So Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, he loved to play with mud, and he'd build these little mud villages, and it was that sort of work that inspired him to do all this research into the human psyche, to reveal to us really all this stuff that's going really on inside us. So when we engage with the earth in this way, especially when we do it playfully, the building thing has gotten way too serious. It's like all this stuff that you failed to mention, Tom mentioned, it's all gotten way too serious. For reasons that I'll go into a little bit later. But when we engage with the earth, particularly in a playful sort of way, it really allows to engage with those parts of ourselves that are inside us, that are essentially invisible, and it really activates them. And we get this then dynamic engagement between what's inside us and what's outside us. So this sort of dynamic engagement of opposites is really a characteristic of life, and this is what came through to me so strongly in all the work I did teaching people and training and building and so on, is this link between the inside and the outside. And in a large part this has partly been missing from the architect profession, that we don't look at the insides of buildings, basically because there's nothing to see. This invisible part of buildings is actually a reflection of the invisible parts of ourselves. So in a lot of ways architecture has become a little like a fashion show. You see the photograph of the building that won the prize for architecture this year. It's just the outside of it, but there's nothing about what the inside is like as an experience. What is it like to be in the building? Because this is what particularly we do in our houses. We spend a lot of time inside them, so that experience of being inside is very, very important. So when our senses are tweaked by working with the earth, we get this feeling of connectivity. We feel connected with nature, we feel connected with ourselves, We feel particularly connected with place. We feel connected with life. We feel nourished. We feel more alive. And we also, meet resistance. We encounter challenge. And in a lot of cases, we encounter fear. And oftentimes that fear is your mother or your father or your brother or your sister being fearful and projecting it onto you. All those things are there, but again, this is part of the dynamic equilibrium that characterizes life. If there isn't a bit of resistance, we don't sort of push back. So it's an important dynamic. So using the earth then as a way of looking at buildings differently and looking at ourselves differently, it allows us to look at life in a different sort of way. And this is what Albert Einstein said we need to do. You can't solve problems that have been created by a particular way of thinking by using that way of thinking. And of course, buildings play a big role in us staying alive, and that's what we're all at. Everybody in the world is doing the same thing. We're all striving to stay alive. So when we look at the earth in that respect, we find building materials, food, water, air, all have this very, very strong earth connection. And of course, understanding this aspect of building, this aliveness of buildings, is nothing new. You know, the Vastu Shastra tradition in India is 5,000 years old, and that's all about making buildings in a particular way, in a particular place, that we feel energized when we're in them, and indeed when we're making them. So we're like children of the agricultural age, and the agricultural age is all about reverence for the earth. It's about colonizing the earth. It's creating boundaries to the earth. And when archaeologists look at remnants of buildings from those traditions, they find this really expansion in human consciousness, interestingly enough. When people stopped moving around and they settled and they started making individual dwellings, it was like the act of making dwellings, and interestingly, the act of being inside dwellings, creates this self-awareness that you cannot escape the fact that you've thought of this, you've done it, that you're inside it, and that you're actually alive. So the anthropologists and the cognitive scientists believe this is really the beginning of human culture and the beginning of us taking control of our own evolution. And this aspect of architecture is very uncommon to hear people talking about it. So I'm very happy to be at a place where people can maybe appreciate this aspect of the architecture, and that how critical then the earth building is to that, and also how critical it is for people to re-engage with the process of making buildings, because it's not a mental thing, it's a doing thing. So that's great to see all that stuff that happened outside during the week, and to see this and the work that Cowman and Fela do, and work that I've done myself in reconnecting people to the process of building, in widening the discussion about what architecture is, that it isn't just about buildings, it isn't just about how much is it, it isn't so much about did you get planning for it. Buildings actually don't do anything. It's people engaging with buildings that's when the stuff happens. So buildings really are contexts for things to happen. So where the building is placed, what the building is made from, how the building is orientated, all of those things are very, very critical. The piece of earth the building is on, what are the energies like? What is the energy like in the clay that we're using? What is the energy like of the people that are helping to make it? Because if we sensitized when we're inside buildings, we begin to resonate with the building itself. And this is where the earth is potentially so beautiful and the wood is so beautiful. But if the work personship is not compatible with your state of mind or your state of feelings, you meet a blockage there that is very hard to overcome. And I suppose the epitome of that is the modern building, which on a very cynical day I will think, I think modern buildings are made to flush people out the door in the morning because they can't stand being in them. And that's good for the economy. And just speaking about the economy, what's happened with the economy is, since the 70s and the tides of gold standard was cut and there was deregulation of the economy, property has become the repository of value of the money, and that it's people creating money by promising that they'll live a life in a certain way for 30 years and pay back really money that they are just creating by working. So this conversion of people's time into money is what's driving the growth in the economy. It's what's driving the rise in property prices, so that we have to look for other ways of creating buildings where people can, in a large case, do nothing, because I think there's way too much going on in the world. People don't have time to think, and that's one of the beautiful things of having a mortgage-free building that's healthy, that's lovingly made, is that you can actually recapture your time, because that's what's happened. People have sold their time into the industrial economy, and because space and time are actually linked to each other, people have lost control of their own space and their time. You hear people saying that, oh yeah, the bank owns my house. So we have to recapture those aspects of life. So I encourage people to look at the gaps in the system, to look at exempted development, the sort of buildings you can make without planning permission. You can build 25 square meter buildings, the back of an existing buildings. Encourage people to make small buildings out of clay and timber. There's quite large allowances then for exempted development that can happen where there's forestry, no planning permission required, and to widen the discussion about what architecture is, get people involved. And I think that Ibuki is just fabulous to have it, and I really welcome the opportunity to talk to you all. So thank you very much.